There was no note or anything by the wedding ring? Is any of her clothes, anything like that missing? It didn't look like she went through and packed up a bag or anything.
This and all that in the bottom, so it'd be kind of hard to tell if she took a little bit, or it'd be easy to tell if she took a lot, but it's hard to tell if she took a little bit or not.
Okay. Did she tell you anything about leaving, moving out?
Not moving out. I mean, the last time I talked to her was this morning. She said she was going to take the kids to a friend's house, and she asked where she was going to be. And then I've texted her today. I've never heard anything, but the car's here. Car seats are here. Unless somebody came and picked her up. But the people that I know, nobody's heard from her. Nobody's seen her.
Right. Who do you guys bank with?
Chase and USA.
Definitely an odd one.
I don't know what I can do right now. Should I drive around like the normal route that she would be?
Where does she normally go to?
I mean, just like drive where like she would normally take the kids to school. People that I know that live down, Kristen lives down that way. I mean, that's the only routes I know she would really take.
Does she go to their house frequently, or?
And not much, but.
Hello and welcome to True Crime Rocket Science. An especially big welcome to the 5,000 people who've subscribed to this channel. It's been a while to get to that number, and thank you for everyone who has formed part of this community. I know many of you are former and current readers of my books and also of the many blogs, and I don't really need to convince you guys of what goes on behind the scenes and sort of backstory in terms of work and research and work ethic and all that kind of thing. I think it's for the new folks that one's got to try to evangelize them and kind of get them on board. Not sure if that's going to be a very easy task if they're not going to read any of the work that's been done. I don't want this channel to be a satisfying medium on its own in terms of my coverage of the case. So in other words, it's not my intention to make this channel a standalone thing. The books are supposed to do that job, and this channel is meant as a support mechanism. It's meant to complement the books, just in the same way that the blogs are meant to do that. It's also meant to, in a way, introduce me to people who don't know me or whatever. I don't really like that, because I don't think that, I would prefer much cleaner, crisper, more professional format, but I'm certainly not going to pay money at this point to do that. So the work that I'm doing here is sort of warts and all. This is really a forum for people who are interested in true crime. It's not really for those who are just sort of entertained by the Watts case and who are sort of going along with it in a sort of almost like soapy addicts. This is for people who are interested in the Watts case, but who are probably have an interest in other criminal cases like Scott Peterson, Casey Anthony, and all those. And in time I'm going to be covering other cases as well and leaving the What's case behind, and it's that audience that are interested in true crime that I want to take with me, whereas I know some people will be interested in the What's case and only the What's case, and when the What's case fades away, so will they. So I'm not addressing that audience. I'm addressing the sort of hardcore true crime guys, and yes, I would definitely like the material to be top notch. It's frustrating for me that it can't be, but I'm certainly not going to spend money on free content. Just not going to do that. I have started a GoFundMe, and the people have spoken and they've said they're not going to spend money either. So we're going to make do with what we can make do. Happy with that. In this episode, we're going to be dealing with the incredible footage that we got from the body cam, especially Officer Coonrod's body cam, and I was really blown away by the just the incredible quality of it, the sound, the scale of it, catching Chris Watts the moment he arrived home. There was even a fair amount of footage before he arrived home. You got an advanced look through the window before he arrived home, and then in a weird way you even followed him into the home and right through the home, upstairs, downstairs, in the basement, to some extent in the garden, in the garage, all over. There were even moments where I'm not sure if it was Coonrod, but one of the officers was shining a torch at sort of ground level at the fabric of the carpet, showing any looking for any signs there, and that was actually incredible, because that footage was actually taken on the Monday. So if there had been any tussle on the ground there, and there'd been any blood spilled, it's possible that Coonrod may have picked it up just by doing that with a torch. But as it was, they went through the whole house. They didn't find anything. It looks like Watts did quite a good job cleaning up after himself. It doesn't look like there were a lot of bodily fluids, although I think there was feces, possibly somewhere in the bedroom, possibly on the stairs. So let's start with the stairs. We're going to go through the stairs, the sleep mask, the nitril glove, the retrieval of Shan'ann's phone, the t-shirt, the handbag, and then finally the aspect that I think is the biggest what the F in this case. But before we get there, please subscribe, and remember, if you're interested in true crime, you'll probably find the research and the discussions here interesting. If you're not so interested and you just sort of want to kind of be entertained by it, it's probably best if you don't subscribe. This is really a channel for intelligent folk who care about these cases and care about the evidence of these cases and care about having intelligent discussions about it. If you don't like umming and ahhing and someone thinking about the stuff, if you prefer someone not to choose their words and try to relate it to the discovery and relate it to photos and relate it to true crime, there are a lot of people out there who waffle and who sort of talk about things that have virtually no bearing on the case. There are lots of people out there, and I really want to encourage you to go to those people. There are people who are talking about shovels a day after the case. So the body cam shows that there's some guy walking down the road with a shovel on August 14th, and quite a few channels have highlighted that. The bodies were somewhere else the day before, like early in the morning the day before. So what does a shovel the next day have to do with any of that? But I'm sure these people sound really interesting, and it's a nice conversation to have. If that's your cup of tea, you really are better off there. And please don't come to this channel, because you're going to find it frustrating. Yeah, we deal with what we can get as close to as possible as objective reality, and it might be frustrating for some people thinking about what was really said, and putting together actual facts and sticking to that. It might be frustrating for people, the pace of that, and being stuck in those confines, right? But that is true crime. I'm not quite sure what the other channels are focused on, maybe just finding something here and finding something there. But here we try to keep it tight and have a disciplined approach to the evidence. And we also try and come up with our own theory. In other words, we think about where all the evidence points to, but still anchored in the psychology of the case, right? Let's go to the suitcase at the bottom of the stairs. It wasn't the same suitcase as the one that she took to North Carolina. I'm not going to go into that any further than that, because I've dealt with it in I think a backstory to another narrative. But a maddening aspect of the tsunami of coverage was that there were only a fleeting glimpses of the suitcase. When Coonrod enters the crime scene, he doesn't even really acknowledge the suitcase. He sort of follows Watts into the kitchen, and then he sort of moves quickly through the house. There's not a there's never a strong visual of the suitcase. There's not a photo of it. There's not a long pause and a close-up where one can see the suitcase. In this respect, it may have been a bit of an oversight from Coonrod. He's first on the scene. It may have made sense, obviously it's easy to say in hindsight, but it may have made sense to talk to Nicole before the time and get the gist from her, get the visual of her arriving home with the suitcase, with the handbag. How was she dressed? What was she wearing? What was she carrying? And then when they enter the house, it was one of the first things Nicole said is, "There's her suitcase," and that was a moment for her to get the policeman's attention, and also to get him to stand in front of it and to look at it, and that was probably one of the best signs of where Shan'ann was last inside the house when no one else saw her, is the suitcase. The suitcase really places Shan'ann in that part of the house at the staircase. Why did the suitcase not make it to the top of the stairs? Some people will say that Shan'ann didn't wouldn't have wanted to take it. I don't think so. That's just a gut feeling, but was Shan'ann the kind of person to leave things lying around? You could say, well, she left her shoes at the door, but they left in a convenient place. But I really don't think Shan'ann would have left her suitcase. I don't think she's the kind of person who would have left the suitcase there. It's possible, but then what about her handbag, and what about her phone? Wouldn't she have left her phone next to her bed? And that wasn't found there either. In any event, it's just unfortunate that the cops didn't start at that point and didn't look very closely at the suitcase. What they could have done even then is confiscated it, and they could have done a scent check even on that for the cadaver dogs. So yeah, as a writer, and as a researcher, it was really frustrating looking at how the cops wandered through the house and they seemed to be looking everywhere except at that suitcase. And so it was very hard to actually find footage where you sort of at the last second caught a glimpse of the suitcase. And as it turned out, you know, the way it was described in the warrantless arrest affidavit, I assumed the suitcase was right next to the stairs, as in sort of at the bottom of the stairs right there. But it's not. It was actually somewhat inward. There's a kind of an alcove on the right hand side of the stairs, and it's somewhat inward and also somewhat outward, meaning slightly to the right of the stairs. And what's the significance of that? Does it mean someone stepped in there and then put them there? You know, if you're going to do that, why not just carry them upstairs? And unfortunately, it's not something that the FBI asked what either. You know, they didn't spend much time asking, you know, did Shan'ann normally leave her baggage downstairs? If you look at that house, everything is in its place though, and I think that gives us some insight into her habits. There are containers for things, everything is in its place. And so wouldn't the suitcase have gone upstairs to where it eventually ended up? Isn't that where it should have gone? And the fact that it didn't go up there, doesn't that indicate something? And all of this sort of came through to some extent in the body cam, where you had confirmation that the suitcase was there, and then incredibly you had confirmation that the suitcase then moved upstairs to the inside of the door. And what was that communicating by doing that? What was Watts communicating? And wasn't he communicating that well, the suitcase was meant to be upstairs, and Shan'ann was meant to be upstairs, and Shan'ann was meant to be in her bedroom? And the other aspect that is kind of strange is, if Shan'ann really had left, why wouldn't she take the suitcase? And if Shan'ann really had left, she'd arrived, been upset, and then left, why wouldn't she take the suitcase with her? And so maybe the suitcase being left downstairs was almost a subconscious way to communicate that Shan'ann wasn't moving in, she was moving out. In other words, we know what Chris Watts wanted, we know what Chris Watts did, we know what he was planning on doing, but maybe the suitcase kind of became a symbolic message saying Shan'ann is in transit. Shannann's not, she hasn't moved in, she hasn't unpacked, she's not staying here. Shan'ann is on her way out. She's gone down the stairs and she's on her way out, which in fact was true. But the fact that the suitcase was stuck there, staying there below the stairs, besides the other symbolism, which is Shan'ann in a way was buried in the ground below stairs, not directly below the stairs at the well site, but she was at the bottom of stairs. You know, she was on the ground, in the ground. And some people might say that's taking it too far, but Watts didn't seem to know what to do with that suitcase, and then later on he moved it. And the same thing seems to apply to so many other things, her phone and other things. My impression was that the suitcase was left at the foot of the stairs, as I've mentioned, but this case that you see in the footage has been placed to the side of it, which, as I say, would have taken 2 or 3 steps. Furthermore, Watts has left something of his own right beside it, a blue container on the side of the case. It's not clear what it is exactly, although at some point I think Baumhover asks him about that, and he talks about it being jeans and they're too big for him. So it's interesting that Watts places some evidence of himself next to the suitcase, and one wonders about that. One wonders whether him doing that is intentionally trying to contaminate the suitcase with himself, right? Now you must bear in mind, if his original story is true, that Shan'ann arrived at the home and she went to bed, right, and she left the suitcase at the bottom of the stairs, then there would be no reason for Watts' DNA to be on the stairs. Do you follow? And you must bear in mind that Watts is painfully aware of things like DNA and smells and all this kind of thing, and we know that because the crime scene was cleaned up. So, and there was virtually no sign of foul play on any of the victims' bodies. He had virtually no defensive wounds, they had virtually no defensive wounds. So Watts is quite a clever criminal in the sense of leaving traces in terms of the crime itself. He was dumb in terms of the bed sheet and this and that, but in terms of the actual execution of the crime and cleaning up what he did, he was quite clever. So if you take the suitcase, and if that's true what we've just said, then an attack on Shan'ann while she was carrying the suitcase could have left traces of himself on it. Small traces. It could be things like fibers, could be things like touch DNA, even a hair or something. And so Watts putting an object that belongs to him next to the suitcase would open the door for some kind of contamination, in theory. In other words, if they did test the suitcase and they found traces of what's on the outer covering of it, he could have said, well, yeah, sure, I put my jeans next to the suitcase. So obviously, it's a very difficult thing in a crime scene that happens inside the home, especially where the perpetrator is someone who lives in the home. Any trace of that person, anywhere in the home is going to be normal. You're going to expect to find traces of someone who lives in the home all over the home. So that's actually difficult. But in a situation where Shan'ann's come from the outside, and your chance of finding what is DNA on the suitcase is less. Obviously, this isn't a situation where one even needs to verify that. We know what's committed the crime. It's not like it's still a whodunit. But the suitcase becomes relevant where we say, where done it? Where was it done? And if what's his DNA is found on the suitcase, it certainly becomes a strong evidence that the attack did happen on the staircase, or even beside the staircase, on the right hand side where the suitcase was found. That would certainly have been out of sight of some of the alarm sensors, and it would have been out of sight from people looking through the doorway. And if Shan'ann had shouted, it's unlikely that she would have easily been heard from that part of the house. So yeah, when I covered the suitcase and the movement from upstairs to downstairs, downstairs to upstairs, we also looked at the sensors, the Vivint sensors, and bear in mind these sensors can basically track the movements of people up and down the house. So that was another aspect. Something that's not discussed much, strangely enough, is the digital ecosystem, not only of Vivint but also the ability of the watches to track movement. And according to Watts's watch, I think he only went upstairs and downstairs that night, something like I think it was 3 times, which is very little. If he also went into the basement, then that is going downstairs once and upstairs once. it makes one wonder whether he ever went into the upstairs bedroom. Surely he went into the basement. Surely those flights were into the basement. And speaking of the basement, that brings up the sleep mask. And why is that moving as well? And the question is, was that moved up from the basement into the bedroom, or was that moved from the bedroom into the basement? Now, with the wealth of around-the-clock video footage we have of the Watts crime scene, as well as the sheer number of officers casing the joint and writing their respective reports, it's inevitable that more signs of Watts' cover-up would become apparent. This is a useful exercise not so much to prove his guilt, but to track his deception, and also as a way of challenging our own true crime perceptual skills. Worth playing for? By meticulously cross-checking the bodycam footage with the discovery documents, we can also find areas where law enforcement missed something or were bamboozled. For one thing, we know the Ruseks unwittingly frustrated the investigation by taking Shan'ann's purple makeup bag. It was requested that it be returned, and ultimately it was, but this was a serious error the cops made. A top defense lawyer would have made a meal out of that in a trial. And in the blog post dated December 16th, I've provided a little snippet from the discovery which refers to Shan'ann's makeup bag, which was retrieved from Frank Rusek. Besides the makeup bag moving to Aberdeen and back, and besides the suitcase moving upstairs and downstairs, and besides the sleep mask moving upstairs to downstairs or downstairs to upstairs, there's also Dieter's movements that are an obvious example of law enforcement leaving open a few seemingly insignificant loose ends. Law enforcement didn't seem to think where the little dachshund was in the house when Watts arrived was necessary for their reports. This was actually a very big aspect for me that I dealt with in the first book. It's probably also why I called the book the Canine series. I actually thought the dog narrative would be very significant. I think one of the reasons why I put a lot of value in it was in the Henry van Breda case, the triple axe murder case in South Africa. There was a strong sort of dog narrative, and the dog narrative was that Henry kept a dog, and the dog normally slept with slept in the room with the two brothers, Henry and Rudy. And when the murders were committed, the dog was out of sight. The dog was nowhere. And again, you know, when you think of a crime in the normal kind of execution of events, then you expect evidence to be there, right? And so one of the things you'd expect in that scenario was the dog's paw prints to be all over the house, you know, because there was blood all over the stairs. And so you would have expected, if the dog was there and the crime was not expected, that the dog would kind of be in the middle of it and he would be running around the house leaving paw prints in blood all over the house. And so we knew in that case that the dog slept upstairs and he slept in the boys' room. And the first victim killed was the older brother in the boys' room. And so, yeah, the fact that there was no dog prints and no barking heard and all that, that also suggested a premeditated murder, and it suggested that Henry took the dog downstairs, probably put him in the garage, possibly even put him inside a vehicle, but basically sequestrated the dog from the scene. And the whole idea was, I want to protect the dog, I want to protect myself from the dog. If the dog wants to stop me from harming my family, I want to make sure the dog doesn't mess up this crime scene that I'm trying to clean up. You know, I need the dog out of the area while I'm, you know, first of all committing the crime, but secondly cleaning up the crime. And then what then happens is that makes complete sense to the criminal, but afterwards an investigator is wondering, where's the dog? Where was the dog when this happened? Because anyway, I'm not going to take it further than that, but I took the same thinking into Dieter. If Chris was strangling any of the family members, surely Dieter would have barked while he was doing that. And bear in mind, it takes 3 or 4 minutes, and Dieter would have heard a struggle, and he would have been upset by it. So that for me was really significant. And there's no interest really from law enforcement for where Dieter was. Yeah, I'm sorry for those who were disturbed by that pause. That pause was trying to think about the next aspect of the case. So if that bothered you, this would be maybe a good time to exit this video and maybe just go somewhere else where people don't pause. There are quite a few videos out there where people chatter. They sort of talk and talk and talk, and that's maybe a much better place for you to head off. So I'm going to give you I'm going to give another little pause, and maybe that's a good time for you to let yourself out. Good. So now, while those people have left, that has given me a chance to think about the next area, and so let's get into it. One aspect that was highlighted was the movement of the black suitcase from the foot of the stairs on the Monday to the bedroom on Tuesday. Why would Watts want to do that? Well, isn't it obvious? Because of an unanticipated event, the cops being summoned so early by Nicole Atkinson, Watts needed to change his story. He needed to put Shan'ann in the bedroom before she supposedly left, right? Now, who knows, perhaps his original story, if her flight wasn't delayed, was that she came home, they argued, and she said she was going back to North Carolina, back home to her folks, back somewhere, or just leaving, but she never made it to the airport. Maybe that was supposed to be the original story. We don't know what was originally going to happen if Shan'ann had arrived on time. We don't know whether the car that would have pulled out would have been the Lexus. We don't know. What we do know is that there were 3 early contradictory versions of what Watts said Shan'ann had done that morning, and this is something I'd love to outsource to you guys, see if you can find them. If he actually says this on the recorded on Bodycam. The one is where he says that Shan'ann left in the middle of the night. He said that to one person. Another version was that Shan'ann may have left, I guess, through the back door or something. And then I think the third version was that he supposed that someone may have come to pick her up. So there are basically 3 versions, and they're slightly different. One is her leaving at night, one is her leaving in the morning, but at her own, voluntarily, and another is someone coming to get her, either with her cooperation or not. But there was inconsistency, and Eddie, Cassie, and Nicole, and I think Shanann's mother all commented on these, the fact that they hadn't heard quite the same story. But it would be good to get that in a chronological order. What was the first story he gave, what was the last one, and who did he tell it to? As far as I know, the one of her leaving in the middle of the night was the first one, and I think it may have been what he told Shanann's mother. I think that was the first version. if you take that version to heart, it basically means Shan'ann didn't sleep in bed if she left in the middle of the night. In other words, she wouldn't have arrived at 2 o'clock in the morning and then left if she'd also gotten into bed. I know some people might argue, well, no, she got into bed, argued, and then left. But you've got to see it from the point of view of the whole thing's a fiction anyway. So she either got into bed or she didn't. In a scenario where she got into bed and still left in the middle of the night, that doesn't really work. But anyway, let's take it a bit further than that. When we cross-reference the footage with the reports, do we see anything else overlooked by law enforcement? Is there any mention of a sleeping mask in the discovery documents? And what you'll notice is as soon as we venture down the rabbit hole around the idea of a sleeping mask, other issues and ideas and evidence crop up like this. On page 1189, what says, you don't want to be the people parading around with like a mask on when their kids are around, and then when the kids go to sleep, you just go your separate ways. This is a very strange comment what's made in terms of the mask. I'm not really going to go into this any further here because it's dealing with symbolic language and it's dealing with an area that's too I think it's a bit too meticulous for YouTube. I don't really want to deal with that here, so I'm going to jump on to the nitril glove. And this is an area that I've not even blogged on in any detail, but there's a blue nitril glove at the top of the refrigerator in the kitchen. And the way that glove is lying there seems to indicate that it was thrown there. It was sort of quickly put there. And if I have to visualize it, I can imagine what's running through the house in that minute that he had, before the officer saw him. And I think what he did in that minute, one was he put the phone in the cushions. He may have put the ring on the bedside table, but I don't know, I've got a feeling that the ring was there anyway, but he may have put the ring there. He may have stripped the bed as well to make it look like Shan'ann was sleeping on the bed. Bear in mind, Watts had already used the bed sheet to carry Shan'ann's body to the well site, and it already used some material from the bed to pick up Shan'ann's feces in the room. But what he may have done is he may have pulled that off the bed without throwing everything off the bed. So in other words, the pillows may have still been on the bed, and the comforter may still kind of been on the bed, or kind of pushed to the side of the bed, and it may have looked, the way he left it may have looked not like people had slept in it, or it may have looked suspicious, put it that way. And so what may have covered the bed in a sheet, or alternatively stripped the bed to make it, just to interfere with whatever the perception was of how he left the bed that night. We don't know in his haste whether that glove was part of it, was part of what he was doing. We don't know. He may have he may even have used that glove when he murdered Shan'ann and sort of tossed it there who knows when, immediately after he committed the crime. It just seems done in a way that was not fully. He wasn't sort of fully aware of what he was doing. I mean, a proper way to have gotten rid of that glove would have been to take it in the truck and dispose of it somewhere else. It shouldn't have been in the house. He could have even burnt it, So maybe he forgot about that. Maybe he ran out of time. But that glove does seem to be quite significant. And so what I want to draw your attention to, which as far as I know hasn't been brought up before, is the body cam footage where it's that quite well-known scene where you see Detective Baumhover in a kind of a maroon shirt, standing fairly casually, leaning on the counter in the left side of the frame. On the right you see Nicole Atkinson with her arms folded. Sometimes she's in the middle of the picture, sometimes she's on the right. Watts is sort of in the middle, sometimes to Nicole's right. But you basically see the three of them. I think they're facing Officer Coonrod, and he's got his back to the kitchen door, and his view of them is through the kitchen towards the lounge and the front door with the staircase on the right hand side. And in this scenario you basically see Baumhover again is on the left hand side of the frame, on the side where the refrigerator is, and he's looking down at the counter while they're sort of waiting and hanging around. And then gradually his attention turns to the refrigerator, and if you watch the footage, it's better to watch the footage than actually look at the frames that are provided. But if you watch the original footage, you see Watts is doing his swaying thing and is looking very guilty and is looking very uncomfortable, and then he's obviously hyper vigilant, is very alert to what people around him are doing. I don't think it was known at that point what was in the garbage, but what should have been, he should have been nervous, and so he is hyper vigilant. He's got reason to be hyper vigilant, and then he notices the detective starting to look towards the refrigerator, and you can also see in the original footage that Watts tries not to make eye contact. He tries not to look as though he's looking where someone is looking. He's sort of doing it through peripheral vision, and then you notice that he notices Baumhover turn towards the refrigerator, and then Baumhover seems to become quite interested in the refrigerator, and at that point Watts looks quite concerned, and he sort of turns towards Baumhover, and at that moment, and it's the last moment in the series of images, Baumhover is looking almost towards the top of the refrigerator, and so is Watts. And I mean, we know what is at the top of that refrigerator. So I just thought that was kind of an interesting moment. Again, this isn't really rocket science. We know who committed the crime, but it's quite interesting catching these little moments where Watts was finding himself found out. And it is pretty amazing what he did, and the fact that he was still playing this game. There were so many little areas that he could have been caught out and found out, and yet he was rolling the dice and taking his chances. Another area that was definitely caught my eye, and it was definitely very frustrating in terms of the footage of the body cam, the body cam footage, was where the children were last seen and where they were last playing. It's on their little couches in front of the television in the downstairs lounge. There's virtually no clear footage of that. It's just so frustrating that the police didn't spend time looking at the artifacts in the lounge, exactly what was going on there, because that is essentially the last moments of the children. If Shan'ann's last moment had something to do with where her suitcase was, if it had something to do with her going up the stairs, then the children's last moments were there at that point. And yet again, there's just the police just sort of wander through it. You can see why they're looking for Shan'ann, they're looking for the children, but they're not there. And so when they're not there, maybe you should spend some time looking at the sort of living arrangements, looking at where things were left, right? Okay, I'm not going to go further into that. Let's go on to the retrieval of Shan'ann's phone or something from the car. What's interesting is in the footage we have of Shan'ann on her last day, when she was in Arizona, it looks like the phone has sort of got a sort of a teal green cover. It's like a light green cover, and we see that on the table in front of her at the restaurant in Arizona. When Watts is holding it, it's that same light green cover, right? But when you look at another picture of Shan'ann and you look at the object that Watts retrieves from the car, it looks pink. Now we don't know for sure whether what Watts retrieved from the car was the phone, but it's possible that it was. And then if it was, then we've got to explain why would he have replaced the cover. And essentially we're talking about replacing it twice, and that means when Shan'ann arrived back, it was the green cover. When she had died, it had the pink cover on, and then the green cover was put back on it and stuffed into the couch. Why? I think there are a couple of possibilities if this is true. First of all, we don't know that he was retrieving the phone from the car, but if he was, then it's possible that in the same way that the suitcase is moving upstairs and downstairs and the sleep mask is moving up and down, there's also the possibility that when Watts attacked Shan'ann, she was holding her phone in her hand, and so part of the cover-up of getting rid of evidence of himself was removing the cover of the phone, because more than likely Watts, I'm certain that after Watts killed Shan'ann, he went through her phone, or he tried to go through her phone. But make no mistake, he handled her phone, and when he handled it, I think he felt, well, just to be careful, I'm going to replace the cover. I'm going to put on a clean cover, and he would then have handled that cover possibly with something else, like a different pair of gloves or something that would leave no trace of himself. In other words, the way the phone was left would have had no trace of him on it. So if the phone was in the car and investigators had retrieved it and had checked it, they probably would have found no traces of what's on the phone itself. I mean, on the face of it or anywhere else. And probably also no trace of Shan'ann as well. In other words, the phone itself would have been wiped clean and all that kind of thing, right? But now in the situation where Nicole was in the house and they wanted to know where Shan'ann was, it was important that they see the phone as Nicole had last seen it, right? And in order for that to happen, in order for Nicole to see it the same way, he had to now put on that original case. But he still didn't want to do that because of the DNA problem, which is probably why it was stuffed under the couch, right? That's how I'm reasoning it. I could be wrong. Of course, when he handled the phone himself, he could then say, if the phone was tested, I'm talking about that casing now, he could say, yeah, well, of course, I handled the phone. A lot in this case was hidden in plain sight, and this may be an aspect that's like that. So that's my analysis of that. It's tricky. It may be making a mountain out of a molehill, I don't know, but it certainly is one way of explaining that little labyrinth in terms of the phone. I want to just mention quickly that where Watt said he didn't know passwords, and he didn't, Shan'ann controlled all the finances. At the same time, he said that Shan'ann had, he had banking apps on his phone. So that doesn't make any sense, that he would have banking apps on his phone but not be able to do the finance or have access to the finances. Does that make sense? When Watts was interrogated by the FBI, he knew all the usernames and passwords of multiple devices. But when it came to the crucial ones, like the banking app, suddenly doesn't know that. So I don't believe that. I think he's dishonest about that. I think he knew about the finances, he knew exactly where they stood, and this is why the money side is the number 3 what the F in this case. It's very, very significant. Even more so, I think, than Nicole Kessinger. I think the money situation was a far more urgent driving force for him than Nicole Kessinger. And how I say this is, what drives a person to cheat on someone else? You know, what makes them miserable to begin with? It's not that somebody else comes along and tears them away. That does happen, but usually it starts off with someone's unhappy about something to begin with. They're in a situation, they want to be in that situation, they want to be married, they want to be committed, they want it to work, but for some reason it's not working. What is it? Money. And so the money malaise hovers over the case for a long time, hovers over the situation for a long time, and then at some point someone else comes along and the person is then ready to leave. So you want to say it starts with the other person, or does it start with problems at home? And I think it started with problems at home, and we know that, you know, they went bankrupt in 2015. Those problems went way back. So Watts had learned a lesson in a way from that bankruptcy. He didn't want it to happen again, and so it makes sense that he was vigilant about that. And he I think he blamed Shan'ann for it, and he must have felt there was no way out of it. There was no way out of their financial conundrum other than to get rid of Shan'ann. And if he'd gotten divorced, she would have drawn him back into it as well, and he wanted to get out of it. He wanted to escape it. That's the way that I see it. Another really frustrating aspect in terms of the body cam footage was the retrieval of Shan'ann's clothing, the clothing she wore when she arrived home. Where were her jeans? Where was that black jumper? Where was her t-shirt? And the body cam footage doesn't follow Shan'ann into the house in that respect. They don't go and look, you know, like right where Watts is standing and look at this. These are the clothes that she was wearing. Now, what is the route that her clothing took? Regardless of where Shan'ann went, what's the route of her clothing? Where did her jeans end up? Where did her t-shirt end up? Right? And you can. There is some footage where you sort of see from a distance. You see into the bathroom, and you sort of see into the laundry basket, and it does seem as though it's there. It does seem as though the Shan'ann's clothing is in the laundry basket. I have a suspicion that Watts would have washed the clothing. I have a suspicion that after killing Shan'ann at 2 in the morning, he would have washed her jeans and her shirt, and by around 5 o'clock, maybe it would have been relatively dry, especially if they had access to a to spin the clothes and that kind of thing. Of course, the footage where we see Watts lifting the jeans is actually only from the 14th, so we don't know for sure whether he did wash it that night, but if he didn't, he for sure would have washed it the night after, and by then it would have been too late. So that's also a frustrating aspect. So I think in a future scenario with law enforcement, follow the trail of the clothing. That's really important. For those people who are adamant that Shan'ann was murdered in bed and all that kind of thing, she changed her own shirt and then she was killed in bed. I don't believe that for a second, but they can't seem to get it into their heads that Watts would have changed her clothing. He changed his own clothing at least 2 or 3 times, including his footwear. So if he's picking up feces and getting rid of bed sheets and changing his clothes, why the heck wouldn't he change her clothes? And there was no need to change the clothing of the children because the oil would take care of that aspect. So even so, he did put their clothing in, he did put their bodies in black garbage bags, and the whole idea with that was to sequestrate them from him, so he was very aware of that. Again, it's a rhetorical question. If he changed his own shirts, I mean, we saw what he was wearing when he left the residence, sort of a dark shirt, and then we saw what he was wearing when he returned, a light grey long sleeve shirt, not the right kind of thing to be worn on a warm day in the middle of summer. And there's even a chance that he was wearing an orange shirt, if that footage in the one convenience store is credible, and it appears to be. If it is, he changed clothes around about 3 times, from the murder to what he wore, walking out there, and so on. We also know he changed his footwear from whatever he wore when he first stepped out to boots. We know that as well. And this brings us to, for me, the biggest WTF in this particular area, and it's the moment that Watts heads into the bedroom and he comes out with the ring. And it's, for me, very significant because he's dealing with Nicole. I think it would have been another thing if Coonrod had said to Nicole and Nicholas, look, this is a crime scene, just stay out of it, just go home and we'll call you, or something like that. But the fact that Nikki was hovering around the crime scene was also feeding into the disquiet of the officers and soon the detective as well, and soon the neighbor as well. It was Nikki's paranoia, and I don't mean paranoia in a critical sense. She was right to be paranoid, she was right to be worried, But it was her paranoia that made Watts sort of feel like, oh crap, I've got to sort this out. I've got to reassure Nikki. I've got to make sure Nikki gets off my back. I've got to do something that's gonna not soothe Nicole, but make her feel kind of confident or ready to believe that his story. Make her feel confident that Shan'ann had left. And so his attempt at this is going into the room and bringing out the wedding ring and kind of putting it forward as a sort of message. Him doing that is symbolic. Him doing that is like holding out a ransom note saying, I don't want to be married to this guy. I've left the marriage. I've checked out of the marriage. And for Watts, this was a big moment. It was like, see, this is what Shan'ann is feeling. Shan'ann doesn't want to be married to me. Shan'ann's upset with me. Shan'ann's left. And he probably knows that Nikki knows that they haven't been happy, especially lately. He probably knows that. The part that is missing is there are other aspects to worry about as well. Shan'ann's not healthy. Shan'ann's pregnant, and they're the children as well. And Watts isn't worried about that. Watts is worried about, well, how can I convince you that she's not here and that she's left? Where Nicole's thinking, is she okay? And that's where Watts got it completely wrong. He knows they're not okay, but he doesn't want them to think that they're not okay. He wants them just to think that everything's okay, everything's the way they're meant to be, she's just left. But Nicole knows that that's not true. Nicole knows she would have gone to the doctor's appointment. And so that wedding ring thing is a real crazy moment where Watts honestly seemed to think that he could get away with it in that, where he would show the wedding ring, and what was she supposed to do? Was she supposed to go, oh wow, I think I know what happened here, and then go home? It wasn't very convincing, and you can see that Nicole wasn't convinced. She sort of looks at it. I think she says, she mumbles something, and then there's like no reaction, and Watts is kind of dumbfounded. It's like he's expecting a big reaction, and he's not getting one from anybody. It's almost as if the spiel he's just performed hasn't changed anything, and he's quite deflated as a result of it. He's quite stung by the fact that no one's really taking it to heart. And that night, Monday night, he would mention the same thing to his mistress, where he would say, Shan'ann left her ring behind, and they were talking about pawning it. And so in terms of his mistress, that was significant. His mistress thought that her leaving the ring behind was a big sign, and it was a big reassurance that what's it said was true, and it was a big reinforcement that Shan'ann had left, that she had checked out of the marriage. But it's one thing to convince a mistress of the narrow confines of that argument. And I don't believe Kissinger did know that she was pregnant, or if she did know, he may have said it's not his child. But in any event, I don't believe she did know that. And the ring would then have been a good enough sign for her that Shan'ann has left. She's had enough. But it wouldn't have been for anybody else. Knowing that Shan'ann was pregnant, she wouldn't just leave everything behind. So we can see that Watts was really playing to an audience of one. He was totally caught up in Kissinger, and he was totally caught up in that life and wanting to make sure that life happened. And he was also caught up in trying to fool Shan'ann, but he'd forgotten about everybody else. He'd forgotten about Nicole and everybody else, and law enforcement. In terms of the crime, he remembered to do a lot of things and a lot of cleaning up, but he still hadn't thought it through, and this may have been as a result of not getting enough sleep and being in love and having his plans changed through the flight delay, but also through Nicole arriving as soon as she did. So the ring aspect was an extraordinary attempt at providing a kind of a ransom note, like providing a kind of a note. And the irony of that ring is that the opposite was true. Shan'ann had actually written a love letter saying that she wants it to work, and that she wants him to work at the marriage, and she wants him to write him a letter back. And so it would be interesting to know what happened to that letter. I'm sure Watts got rid of it, but the artifacts of that letter were nevertheless present on Shan'ann's phone, because I think she sent it to a friend, may have been Sarah Nudd or Addie, but she'd also so in effect the digital archive of that letter was on Shan'ann's phone, and that proved that she wanted to stay married. And so his story that she had left didn't add up, and that the fact that he was saying that that she'd left, and that it could be proved that he was lying, that is part of why the police got onto him as quickly as they did. So what do you guys think? Do you think the ring was the biggest WTF in terms of the body cam footage? Do you think when Watts arrived home that was the biggest WTF? I'm talking about the footage related specifically to the house and the inside of the house. Do you think the not knowing what happened to the t-shirt is the biggest WTF? Do you think the movement of the handbag from the office to the kitchen counter was a WTF, and the discussion around that? Do you think the nitril glove on the refrigerator is a bigger kind of WTF? What about the sleep mask? For me, the suitcase was very, very significant, but you don't really see Watts doing anything except when no one's looking. He takes the suitcase from downstairs upstairs. The reason I've singled out the ring is because you see it on camera, and it's in front of Coonrod, and it's in front of in front of Nicole Atkinson, and then you see how they react, and you see in that moment it's kind of a proxy for the whole ill-advised nature of the whole crime, is that Watts just isn't very good at pulling off what he's trying to pull off. It's just not very convincing. And in that moment you sort of just see how it's a shrug moment. It's kind of like, so what? In any event, thank you for listening. There'll be 3 more episodes in the series, 8, 9 and 10, and if you're finding some insight in these episodes, please subscribe and share. Please also share your thoughts, especially related to the evidence and any other aspects. What do you think? Do you think that Shan'ann changed her own shirt, or do you think that Watts did? Do you think that Shan'ann's shirt was washed that night or the following night? What do you think?
There was no note or anything by the wedding ring?
No. I put it back where it was earlier on.
Was there any of her clothes, anything like that missing? It didn't look like she went through and packed up a bag or anything.
This and all that on the bottom, so it'd be kind of hard to tell if she took a little bit, or I mean, it'd be easy to tell if she took a lot, but it's hard to tell if she took a little bit or not.
Okay. Did she tell you anything about leaving, moving out?
Not moving out. I mean, the last time I talked to her was this morning. She said she was going to take the kids to a friend's house, and she asked where she was going to be. And then I've texted her today. I've never heard anything, but the car's here. Car seats are here. Unless somebody came and picked her up. But the people that I know, nobody's heard from her. Nobody's seen her.
Right. Who do you guys bank with?
Chase and USA.
Definitely an odd one.
I don't know what I can do right now. Should I drive around like the normal route that she would be?
Where does she normally go to?
I mean, just like drive where like she would normally take the kids to school. People that I know that live down, Kristen lives down that way. I mean, that's the only routes I know she would really take.
Does she go to their house frequently, or?
And not much, but.
Does she do her work from a laptop, or is it just
phone?
Just from the phone.
What about your bank account?
I tried her logins are different than mine.
It's not a joint account.
It's a joint account, but like she controls all of it. Like she doesn't let me do the finances because I was pretty horrible back in the day, so she just kind of handles all that and she does it. And I have the apps on my phone, but I don't have her login to get into it.
Okay.
Unfortunately, that's.
Can you log into your account though?
I can. No, I don't have a laptop, but she has the one downstairs still. But her login is different. Her login, I don't know her login. Like I know the password, but I don't know her login for user ID is going to be. It's always the same password, 4281915 capital SW. But it's just a matter of getting the login.
Usually the first it would show activity if she.
Right, if she's getting gas or.
Yeah, somewhere.